was analogous to kind of maybe a 1,500-piece puzzle. And you folks are trying to figure out, as publishers, what the future looks like. And it's kind of like a puzzle that you have to kind of try to solve. I'm going to kind of use a metaphor of a puzzle as well, but it seems to be a much simpler one, and I'm going to kind of try to come at it from a different vantage point. So I'm going to read through a few thoughts here and to kind of stake out the turf. The first thing I wanted to make is, right now, the reality that you all face is the reality that education is facing, and that is that public education, as I call it, one of the crown jewels of our great democracy, is sailing directly into the perfect storm. Schools are being asked, in fact required, to successfully deliver a curriculum that raises standards for all students. They are being asked or even required to successfully teach an increasing proportion of students who have historically and traditionally been the most challenging to teach. And finally, schools are being asked, required to accomplish the above with fewer resources. So you've got more difficult challenges, higher level, and fewer resources. To paraphrase the famous line from the movie Jaws, when Roy Scheider first saw the great white shark, "Captain, we're going to need a bigger boat." The system in place, now No Child Left Behind represents the capstone of a series of state-based accountability programs that began in the early to mid-90s. NCLB was what is to be called a game changer for two profound reasons. First, it officially, formally, and comprehensively changed the primary mission of public education. One of the keys to your future is to figure out how that new mission impacts the work that you do and would like to do in terms of your own industry and so forth. Never before in our history were public schools expected or required to reduce or eliminate the major consequences of being poor in America by leveling up the assessed educational proficiencies of poor and disadvantaged students. In my opinion, that is a new mission. It is a change in the mission. And so that is going to require a whole different kind of a thought process for how to go forward. Second, it forced educators to admit to the fact that the system in place was never designed nor even intended to successfully teach all students a high standards curriculum. Now Roy Scheider might have said, "Captain, we're not only going to need a bigger boat, we're going to need a different kind of boat." Designing a learning-centered system, the captain might have been asked, "What's wrong with the design of this boat?" The current system in place has been described as a teacher-centered system. Your primary client has been, up to this point, in my opinion, the teacher and teaching. The new demands center on learning for all, each, every student. The transforming the mindset from a teacher-centered system to a learning-centered system represents a profound shift in perspective. For example, educational publishers have tended to use effective teaching research as the profound knowledge that supports their efforts. The new reality requires that the profound knowledge used to inform the work must now focus on the principles of human learning. That is no longer about making the teacher more efficient and effective. Educational leaders must now be making the student more efficient and more effective. Educational publishers are going to have to see their primary client as being the individual learner, not the individual classroom teacher. For the publishers, this means having to confront the fact that virtually all learning is an act of choice on the part of the learner. The captain wants to know, what gear will the new boat require? There are only about 5 different resources that can be used to equip the learning-centered school. We can buy new and different talent of the crew, alter the time, build different structural arrangements, refocus the organizational culture, and finally acquire different tools and materials, which is mainly what many of you are working on. The combination of these resources will be needed to ultimately depend on the captain and the crew as they confront the large and increasing individual differences that the learners bring to the situation. We just heard about the fact that the call for leveled materials because you've got such differences in the room. As long as this country refuses to place kids at an appropriate level of difficulty where they will be appropriately challenged and hangs on to the notion of continuing to place them on a basis of chronological age, which is, I think, a fundamental error in the system, then her calling for level materials is the best hope a classroom teacher has for contending with a fundamental defect in the current system. Clearly, the computer and other information technologies coupled with the internet, provides just-in-time access to a rich array of potentially useful tools. It gives the teachers individually and the school more generally the needed agility to customize the services to successfully meet the needs of all learners. For example, the teacher would have access to tools, resources, materials, and skills to help a failed learner, and different tools, resources, and materials to help an intentional non-learner. One of the things we spend time talking to schools about is the difference between what do you do in the face of a truly failed learner versus what do you do in the face of a truly intentional non-learner. The thesis I put forward is the longer kids are in school, the more likely the explanation for failure derives from intentional non-learning rather than failed learning. And that is and I suggest to you that to re-engage an intentional non-learner is going to take a whole different look than trying to help a truly failed learner. And right now that is, I think, not being played up enough in the kind of materials and work that you're talking about. And finally, the last point I want to make is that I think the opportunity, the theme about free in the world of free, but my last point is I think free sells. And let me give you a perspective on that and move on. Bill Gates, in his book, Business at the Speed of Thought, set forth a business concept that can guide those who wish to make the transformation to the new high-tech, virtually instantaneous world that represents education